Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, our September Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. Well, we live in interesting times. This morning's newspaper contains, the Washington Times, of course, contains a story that Janet Reno is going to run next year for governor of Florida. And you can observe that yourself in the story that is involved with her running for governor of Florida. What is not so widely known is that in a short time, later this fall, Janet Reno has a long-scheduled speaking engagement, of all places, in Waco, Texas, which put me in mind of an extraordinarily appropriate verse from a poem by Rudyard Kipling. And the poem is The Gods of the Copybook Headings, and I used the entire poem once in a speech I gave about traditional values, but the relevant verse in this poem is so exquisitely appropriate that I'm going to quote it for you again here in the context of Janet Reno going to give a speech at Waco, Texas. The verse is, "The dog returns to his vomit, the sow returns to her mire, and the burnt fool's bandaged finger goes wabbling back to the fire." The Leadership Institute's campus leadership program activists in Texas, of whom there are many, informed me some weeks ago that Janet Reno was coming to Waco and that they had an interesting reception planned for her in Waco, where they're coming in from all across the country. So far this year, the Leadership Institute has trained 2,264 students in 85 schools, and we've placed 84 job seekers through our employment placement program. You have before you on the program, on their tables there, these blue sheets which include our schedule of schools for the year 2001. I'd like to ask you to carefully review the calendar and consider attending one of our programs. In the next week or so, we're having 4 seminars on to get out the vote, on the techniques of how to get out the vote, which we are offering on September 8th in Virginia Beach and Richmond, and on September 11th, next Tuesday, here in Arlington and in Roanoke. And on September 15th, Saturday a week from now, we're going to hold one in East Brunswick, New Jersey. Now, of course, we are a nonpartisan educational foundation, and the fact that we are holding Get Out the Vote seminars in Virginia and New Jersey simply means that that's where we feel there will be a demand for this kind of service. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Joshua Mercer, who will give the invocation and Pledge of Allegiance. Joshua serves as the campus journalism coordinator for the Leadership Institute Center for Print and Broadcast Media, and in that capacity he helps conservative college students launch independent newspapers. When he was a student at Hillsdale College in Michigan, Joshua started his own campus publication with the help of the Leadership Institute. Now, of course, Hillsdale is not notably a hotbed of left-wing activity, but conservative students there may appropriately start a conservative publication, but just to make sure that he was serving some of the great unwashed across the country, Joshua distributed his paper at over 200 campuses across the country. A Minnesota native, Joshua first became interested in journalism when he published a family newsletter at age 7. Joshua, would you come lead us in the invocation and give us a pledge?
Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for bringing us together today in fellowship. We thank you for this wonderful feast which will nourish our bodies. Remind us to always serve our friends, our family, our neighbors, and our country. And help us, O Lord, to always be thankful for all that you give us. In your name we pray. Let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Josh. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Labert, who will give us an update on the activities of our Campus Leadership Program. Dan is the National Field Director for the Leadership Institute's Campus Leadership Program, and he is responsible for the national recruitment of conservative student leaders as well as marketing and public relations for the Campus Leadership Program. He also directs the Leadership Institute's flagship training seminar, the Youth Leadership School. Dan was practically born into politics. His entire family is active, and Dan has successfully managed their campaigns, including his mother's 1996 race back home for City Council. Dan Labert.
Morning. As Morton mentioned, I'm here to give you a quick update on the latest activity in the Campus Leadership Program. Don't worry, I know we're already running a few minutes late. I'll keep my words short and sweet so we can move on to our featured speaker. The Campus Leadership Program reached a milestone this past year. We finally surpassed the 200 mark of student organizations. To date, CLP tips the scale at 221 conservative student organizations in 37 different states. We have visited more than 354 colleges and universities around the nation, and believe me, our membership is continuing to grow. Each of these organizations continue to accept the challenge of bringing the conservative revolution to their campus. In the past 2 years alone, more than 250 conservative events and functions have taken place. In addition to local speakers, starting campus newspapers, nationally recognized speakers like Ward Connerly, David Horowitz, Dinesh D'Souza, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, all have visited these campuses to help spread the message of the conservative movement. We also keep our tradition alive of co-sponsoring events with different organizations. Eagle Forum, the National Rifle Association, Accuracy in Academia, just to name a few. This past year, the Campus Leadership Program has also taken over the Youth Leadership School. To date, we've increased the average attendance per school to 41 students. Now, there's a schedule in front of you. We have 10 schools upcoming this fall. I invite all of you to take a look at it. And if you know of any student that may be interested in attending this school, please encourage them to contact the Institute. Or they could register online. This school, the Youth Leadership School, is a life-changing experience. I could speak a lot longer with you this morning if I shared just some of the stories from people that I've met and how this school has changed each one of their lives. The school itself is also vital in helping us choose interns for the Institute. The past 5 classes alone, more than 40% of these interns have been active CLP leaders on their campus, in addition to being top graduates from the Youth Leadership School. Now, I can go on all morning about this program. I love the Campus Leadership Program. I see it making differences on college campuses around the country. Whether it be our CLP leaders moving on from after graduation and running for office like Thomas Froome in North Carolina, or our current CLP leaders traveling abroad to demonstrate the United States' position on global warming in Bonn, Germany. CLP students continue to make a difference on their campus and in their community. On a side note, I could reiterate Morton's words this morning when Janet makes her first visit to Reno, Texas. We'll be there. We'll give her a nice warm welcome. But thanks to your support and supporters around the country, this program does make a difference. I invite all of you to check us out online. Give the Institute a call. I'd be happy to talk with any one of you. And if you know, like I said, I wouldn't be a good director if I didn't give my own program a plug. If you know students, we get them involved. They don't just go to college and sit in their dorm rooms and watch TV or whatever shows are popular now. We have them in front of the White House. We have them getting trained. We have them around the country. We have them internationally this past summer, as I mentioned. So once again, please encourage any students you know to get in touch with us. Thank you very much. Have a good morning.
Thank you very much, Dan. And to introduce our speaker for the morning, we have Ruth Blessing. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Institute know that Ruth's younger sister has been here for some time, but Ruth is an intern here this fall, working with me and my assistant Amy Green. Ruth is currently a senior at Bob Jones University studying accounting, and upon completion of her internship, Ruth plans to finish college and pursue her master's degree. She says she enjoys public speaking, and she has competed in speech and debate tournaments throughout high school and college, and has been active in politics for many years, and she is an avid reader of conservative literature. To introduce our outstanding featured speaker, Ruth Blessing.
Polling results have become daily news for most of us as Americans, and as we all know, their wording, analysis, and accuracy often have to be questioned. Our speaker this morning is a nationally respected pollster who's been praised for her interpretation, analysis, and accuracy. She's advised clients, including presidential candidates and leading members of Congress. Our speaker is also a frequent television commentator, appearing on networks such as CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, the Fox News Channel, and ABC network shows. This is where I first became familiar with her. Her clarity of thought and non-confrontational speaking style make her a delight to anyone who's privileged to have the honor of watching her. She's been a tremendous role model to me for years, and it's an honor to be able to introduce to you Kellyanne Fitzpatrick Conway.
Thank you very much, Ruth. By the way, yes, I have a new last name. I don't hyphenate it. I don't believe in hyphenations, African Americans and Italian Americans and Fitzpatrick Conway. If I run into one more conservative who is shocked that I changed my last name, remember, ladies and gentlemen, that is a tool of the feminist left, changing your last name. For those of you who chose not to do it, God bless you just the same. But I think it all depends on what's most important to you in your life, and that makes it an easier choice. But I can't believe the sort of hand-wringing that goes on among conservatives. Oh my God, what's going to happen to your business? You changed your name. When you move, I have to change 4 lines in my address book for you. This is one simple deletion and addition. I mean, Michael Jackson used to be black and he's now white. All I did was change my last name. This was very simple. Very, very simple. Plus, for years, I've been asked the age-old question that Sigmund Freud first asked that was never quite answered: what do women want? And in a political and ideological context, it's usually posed to me as, Kellyanne, how do we get more women to vote conservatively, to really vote the way they think, which is much more conservatively? And I say, oh, that's easy. Forget the ones in college. And I apologize to our college intern, who I'm very happy to see here. But forget the ones in college. You've got to give women the 4 magic M's: marriage, mortgage, munchkins, and mutual funds. And there I was. I had the mortgage, I had the mutual funds, and I had failed on the really good side of the ledger, the marriage and the mortgage, the marriage and the munchkins. So I'm 3 for 4, and certainly if God continues to bless me, I'll be 4 for 4 in due time. I do want to talk to you about polls today. I think if placed in their proper context, polls are the most useful, most insightful component in any modern political campaign, or, and more importantly, to our purposes, any modern issues campaign or public policy undertaking. I do believe, though, that in their current context, polls are the most abused, misunderstood, overused component in modern politics and modern public policy making, if not contemporary culture. And that is concerning me also. I'm going to talk about 4 things today. Number 1 is what I see in the polls. Number 2 is what I don't see in the polls. Number 3 is how to read the polls for all of us, make us better consumers of the polls. And 4, how to use the polls, and by implication, how not to use them, which goes back to what we don't see in the polls. And then number 5, and most importantly, to take your questions. Number 1, what I see in the polls. I should tell you from the beginning, I've been in polling since 1988. I was very blessed to take a job at a very young age with Dick Worthland, who was pollster to President Reagan. I consider that the place where I learned my craft, and having had the opportunity to hone it and then own my own business for the last 6.5 years has been one of my greatest blessings. Thank you very much, Ruth, for a very warm introduction that my mother helped you write. But in addition, for not reminding these folks that I am a lawyer. I am a fully recovered attorney, 12-step program and everything. But I will say that my legal education, I married a lawyer, it's enough for one household. My legal education has really helped me to become a better pollster, because the law teaches you to think in a very linear concept, problem solution. A plus B plus C goes to D, not A plus B plus D plus F goes to C. Sequencing, very important. Ruth gave a very nice introduction about the phraseology, the sequencing, the science of polling. And I do want to address all of that today. What I see in the polling is, from my perspective as a cultural anthropologist, not as a political pollster. Because, and conservatives, I think we conservatives must remind ourselves that we believe politics is meant to respond to culture, not the other way around. And I fear that natural order has been perverted in today's modern political culture. That the politicians make a decision, and boom, we're supposed to change the way we school our children, or worship our God, or live our lives, or spend our money. It's the other way around. Politics was meant to take the temperature of the people, to find out what it is they want, how it is they are already living their lives, and respond or not respond accordingly. So I look at all this as a cultural anthropologist, and here are some of the cultural trends, heartening and disturbing, that we're seeing in our data right now. Number 1 is, with so many more people feeling a little bit more secure about their finances, that may change in the next several months, but with many more people feeling secure and in control of their finances, of their spending power, we find that people are most concerned about the few things left in this world that are simply and literally beyond their control. That's why so much attention is given to events when planes fall out of the sky, when missing interns cannot be found, when someone is diagnosed with cancer, God forbid, when you or someone close to you is ill or someone has died. These are things that you literally can't control, which is why there's a lot of sensationalism when there's a school shooting, because you feel like you did everything you could to raise the child properly, but you haven't in the school. I have my own opinions about what to do on that, and these are the few things that you cannot control. We also, as a culture, seem to have the thickest shock absorbers in our history. It is impossible to shock the American mind. I think that's very sad. We are impervious, it seems, generally speaking, to things that used to make us raise our eyebrows. What formerly made us raise our eyebrows now makes us shrug our shoulders. It simply, quote, doesn't matter. It's none of my business. I don't want to judge you. There is no shame. There is no judgment. And so that's their problem. You think about our communities and our neighborhoods now in many places in this country, rural, urban, and suburban. Years ago, you borrowed that proverbial cup of sugar from your neighbor and you invited them over for potluck, or your children played together. Unheard of in many, many areas in our culture. Our, quote, communities are just houses that look alike, lined up near each other, people who happen, just if it's a fortuitous circumstance, they live in the same place at the same time. There really is not that melding together in many places. And so that, too, has led to us being very mechanistic, very selfish, not personally responsible, let me make the distinction, but very self-involved. And that, again, has made our shock absorbers fairly thick. Polls have really contributed to that, and I will get to that. The other thing we're seeing is that the bifurcated mind in America continues. The evidence of that is when you bifurcate the question about the economy versus our moral direction. And we have seen very hearty, very positive, optimistic trends for years now, literally for years, about the state of the nation's economy and also the state of your personal finances. Those numbers have been quite buoyant and quite consistent for some time. On the other side of the ledger, though, people feel almost the opposite about the moral direction and the cultural fiber in our society. And that is concerning them greatly because we have many more tangible goodies. Everything seems attainable. Yet at the same time, that which seems unattainable is that much more beyond our wingspan. And it's bugging people. They don't simply know what to do about it. For some, they take on more personal responsibility and solve it closer to home, in their neighborhoods, their communities, within their households, in their places of worship, in their places of work, in their children's places of schooling. But for many others, it actually has made them, instead of pointing the finger inward, it's made them point the finger outward. And if you want to play the blame game in this society, pick a card, any card. It's big oil, it's big business, it's the Christian right wing, it's the politicians, it's Washington. It's everybody but you. Everybody is responsible but you. And that is very, very disheartening. I will say something very positive, and Helen Blackwell heard me speak about this at my home earlier this summer, because it's still summer, according to the calendar. Earlier this summer, when we released a poll for the Susan B. Anthony list, which showed some very, very optimistic news about the state of the nation on the question of life versus abortion. And what is very positive to take from this data is it proves once and for all that phraseology in polling and giving you options from which to choose is the most key in determining where the breaks in our culture are. We are not a black or white society. We do not think in terms of yin or yang, A or B. We want A, B, C, D, all the way through the alphabet in terms of options, and we've got them. And we find that when people are given a gradation of viewpoints from which to choose to explain and define their own position on abortion, you are finding more and more people adhere to one of the pro-life positions, as it were, and back away from. Only 14% of people in this country, of voters in this country, agree that abortion should be allowed any time for any reason during a woman's pregnancy. That is essentially the partial birth abortion position. That is the Clinton, Kennedy position. That is the position of the Democratic Party. I don't know. I've never seen Al Sharpton's perspective on that, but I will guess what it is, speaking of other presidential candidates. That is the position of them. And it's very important to remember that. If the media are going to ask, are you pro-life or pro-choice, and choice being a core governing value in this society, then many of the people would prefer a third option saying, I'm really undecided, or I'm not real sure, or sometimes a little of both, or more and more science and medicine has proved, quote, it depends, I'm not sure. The people are saying it depends now based on science and medicine. We're standing on the other side of the barricades during Roe versus Wade 30 years ago. And that's a very positive development. But you're not going to get that if people are just asked, are you pro-life or pro-choice? And so we don't ask it that way. We say, which of the following comes closest to your position on the issue of abortion? Abortion should be prohibited under all circumstances. Abortion should be allowed, but not, abortion should be allowed, but only to save a life for the mother. Abortion should be allowed, but only to save a life for the mother or in cases of rape or incest. Abortion should be allowed for any reason, but not past the first 3 months of a woman's pregnancy. Abortion should be allowed for any reason, but not past the first 6 months of a woman's pregnancy. And finally, abortion should be allowed for any reason at any time during a woman's pregnancy. We've got roughly 12 to 14% adhering to that last position. You have, and these are available to anyone who wants them. You've got, either through us or the Susan B. Anthony list, you've got roughly about 14% agreeing with the first position. Abortion should be prohibited under all circumstances. But when you add together the first three I said, prohibited always, allowed to save life of the mother, allowed to save life of the mother, or in cases of rape or incest, you're up to 48% of the country's voters. 48%. You add to that a ban after the first 3 months. And I'm not advocating that, ladies and gentlemen. I'm merely trying to show. I would like to interject my personal opinion, but a pollster knows, first of all, that that's not important. You can ask me during the questions. You can call me and ask me anytime. But that's really part of the problem with polling today. When you add together the ban after the first 3 months, you're up to 67% of the country. What in the world? This is one of those easy issues, if you ask me, if put in a proper context. You're up to 67% of the country. About 12, 13% agree with that other position about don't allow it past the first 2 months. But where religion and morality had won their adherence on one side or the other of the debate, now science and medicine have kicked in. And it's a much more favorable argument for those who adhere to a pro-life position than not. But what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that the best ways to ask about polls, we're talking about what I see in the polls, I'm going to dovetail into Consumer's Guide to the Polls. The best way to find out what people really think is to ask them, but to give them choices. Now, Morton and Helen will not walk into their favorite restaurant tonight and be told, oh, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell. Here's your table, and here's your dinner. Have a nice time. No. They sit down, and they are presented a menu of options. And this is not unlike the menu of options you are presented in and day out. I smell and see that you even had one here this morning, which, having spent too much time on the West Coast, it's nice to not be among any vegans. I smell various parts of the pig here, so that's good. And my dog's in the car, and I did promise her that I would bring her some. Now, they won't walk into there. They're going to be handed a menu of options. Pretend this is the menu. And if Helen and Morton are anything like my husband and me, you sit down and you're like, oh my God, what are you going to have? Oh, I don't know. I was thinking of the salmon. Oh, I was thinking of the filet. Well, you know what? I was too, so why don't we get one of each and we'll just share, and that's okay. Well, do you want an appetizer? Well, I don't know, because I may want dessert. Well, if you want the Grand Marnier souffle, order it now because it takes 35 minutes. It's like the most stressful part of the day, to order off these menus. And they've gotten just bigger and bigger. And this fusion cuisine and like side dishes like couscous and stuff like that. It's mind-boggling. But what happens? After they decide what in the world they're going to have for dinner, a waiter comes over and says, in addition to our usual menu, we have 18 specials tonight. And that's just for aperitifs. Now that's a good thing. That is the American way. That is democratization and freedom at work. You have a menu of options. If you ask me, America always sticks to what they know and what they want. We spend some of our life in New York, and where my husband practices law, and We always, everybody's like, oh, New York, you can do anything. And this tells you something about the American mind, too. You can do anything and eat anywhere and go anywhere and see any show and be anything. I'm like, yes, but nobody ever does. I feel like Fred and Barney in the car in the Flintstones. I keep seeing the same reel, the same 3 houses, the same 2 dinosaurs. Again and again and again and again. And it's just nobody ever does. Everybody sticks to what they know, which is human nature. But that tells you something about the problems with polls and about not giving you a menu of options from which to choose. So if you are just given A or B, if you are just told, do you support or oppose protecting the environment? Do you support or oppose improving public education? And the polls start screaming to you from the headlines, from the breaking news, which is never really breaking news. 85% of the country supports protecting the environment. 88% of the country supports improving public education. Well, who in God's name are the other 12%? Those people, I'm not sure. You? Oh, okay. He's been in our poll, so I won't get the question, how come I've never been polled? At least he's been. Who does not support nice concepts like world peace and chocolate chip cookies and goodness and light? It's easy. Only 87% of this country believe in God. If you are telling me that the environment's doing better than God, then we have more problems than we can solve with the wake-up breakfast. We need to wake up beyond this breakfast. But that tells you something, because if you are just told feel-good phraseology, respond to feel-good phraseology, is your thumb up in the air or down in the air? Do you like it or not? Again, you could just shrug your shoulders and say, yeah, I like it, or it's okay, because it has no consequence to you. I haven't forced you to prioritize. I haven't said, what does this really mean to you? And of course, you like, quote, healthcare security. Let me throw a couple of other ones out there that are very corrosive to the conservative movement. Of course you like things called campaign finance reform, patient bill of rights. Of course this sounds great to hear about stem cell research. These all sound great. I want more of it. Yip-de-doo, good stuff. Well, we want free Q-tips in this country if you're willing to give them to us. But not if they're not free, and not if I'm going to take away something else from you. That's why the best polls out there are the ones that present you with a menu of options from which to choose. Ladies and gentlemen, the media are never, ever going to start asking their questions that way. I kid you not. And I try to never say never on that one. I'm dead sure. They will never begin asking their questions that way, because it takes too much money, it takes too much time, and it takes too much thought. Private pollsters like myself, from both sides of the political aisle and all sides of the ideological spectrum, have the luxury and the necessity of time when doing our polls. We will not do an overnight poll that is national in scope. We simply will not. I've told any number of clients we will not do that poll, because you have to give yourself the benefit of time. But if I have my headlines already written for tomorrow's LA Times or Washington Post, I need to get that poll done now. I have conclusions already in search of evidence. I'm going backwards. I'm in the media. I need to break news in the next hour. I need the equivalent of OJ in that Bronco. So the best way to do it is not to get off my lazy bum and report it as a journalist, but to go out and ask we the people what we think of the bank robber, the plane crash, the car chase. Which leads me to my next point about consumer guides to the polls. So we should A, have a menu of options from which to choose, like the 6-point abortion scale I told you, versus the are you pro-life or pro-choice. But B, polls must ask people to render an opinion on matters about which they know something. I stand before you as someone who can think of 10 billion plus 6 things she knows little or nothing about. Therefore, I do not hold myself out as an expert on them. I don't try them at home or anywhere else. I don't go on TV and talk about them. I don't write about them. And that's important, because I should not render an opinion on matters about which I know little or nothing. Now, the list of what we Americans know little or nothing about is shockingly and growing long. Do you support or oppose stem cell research? This made Newsweek magazine do a cover story on, quote, stem cell research. It said 77% of Americans supported stem cell research. I would have challenged Newsweek, as I did when I called up, to find 77 Americans who knew what that was. The guy was so mad at me. I said, then go find 77 people at Johns Hopkins who knows what it is. I'll make it even easier for you. I'll go down to Fairfax Hospital with you. Find 77 people there who know what stem cell research is. Don't tell me that 77% of the country has an opinion on something about which we know little or nothing, that if you did a LexisNexis search, was mentioned twice last year in the news at all. So think about that. Do you support or oppose campaign finance reform? 84%, 75% in any of the polls say they support campaign finance reform. That's not a biased question. That is more dangerous than a biased question. That is a useless question. There is nothing biased about the phraseology in that question. Do you support or oppose campaign finance reform? It is useless because I would answer that question yes, because I think Buckley versus Vallejo should be overturned and there should be no limits. Therefore, I am for a reform of the current campaign finance laws. That is not what is intended when the media asks that question. Do you support or oppose campaign finance reform? And if you said yes, please write a check to John McCain's campaign fund. He who's for campaign finance reform. But anyway, that is not what is meant by it. That's why when a journalist calls me or calls you and says, I'm doing a story on gun control, I usually say, I'm sorry, there's either a bad connection or I don't understand the question. What is gun control? I mean, if you're doing a story on something you've already concluded, if you already have the premise, what do you need me for? If you're doing a story on the Second Amendment, if you're doing a story on gun control versus Second Amendment right to, and then, you know, I get to be a smarty pants and I take out my copy of the Constitution that's sitting in the front of my desk. I'm like, I don't see gun control anyone in here. Oh, but look, there's the Second Amendment. I see all this stuff and they get very, very mad, and unless you attack another conservative, then you're not quoted the next day. Oh boy, ouch. But that's really important. Do you support or oppose gun control? That question has been asked by saying, do you support or oppose keeping kids and guns away from each other? Well, again, no, I think that's a great idea. Secondly, firstly, it's already the law. It's already the law. So it's a useless question. And useless questions are more dangerous and more corrosive to the conservative movement because they're more difficult to detect. If you hear a biased question, you're smart enough to figure that out. And I always tell people, hang up the phone, because that'll make that polling outfit a little bit more responsible about the way they operate. But a useless question is, it seems so insidious. And that is the real problem with polls today. They are this drip-by-drip effect. Unlike when the plane falls from the sky, when the person opens up fire in an airport. Unlike then everybody's attention stops and turns and looks at the same thing. Polls have this insidious effect every single day. Polls have become a substitute for many Americans for thought. They become a substitute for some politicians for principle. But they become a substitute for reporting by most journalists in the major media. Years ago, when I started for Dr. Wortham, we would get a call. Gee, hi, I'm from the Washington Post. The call would eventually come to me, which tells you something about that at that time, the relationship between the media, polls, and politics, because I was lowest on the totem pole. Have you done any polls in education? I'd look through the files. There's no such thing as email then. Barely had a fax machine. And I would look through the files, and I would find, you know, if we had done a survey or something, and I would fax it over with the methodology and the science and the phraseology. And the next day you would open up the newspaper, and you would find a 2-page spread on, quote, education reform. But it would be filed from some other place. And it would include interviews with the parents and the teachers. And it would have federal education expenditures and state budget projections. And it would have the reporter would have examined the curriculum, would have sat in the classroom and watched the interaction between. And a little parenthetical buried somewhere deep within the story would say, parentheses, 54% of Americans agree with this according to a recent poll. That's it. Now the poll is the entire story. It is the headline. It might as well be the byline. And tomorrow's story is about how tomorrow's poll is different from today's poll, leading another story. This, in keeping with this principle that we must ask people to render an opinion on a matter about which they know something. That's the definition of opinion, by the way. If you don't hold an opinion, which by definition is a conclusion reached according to an application of known fact to reason through a cognitive deliberative process. If you can't arrive at an opinion, then you're stuck giving the pollster your best guess, your greatest hope, sometimes your deepest fear, but usually your greatest hope. Washington Post ran a poll question about 4 or 5 months ago now. It actually asked the question, when do you think the Middle East peace conflict will end? Now, unless you've got a sample of one, God, how in the world do I know? But what do we Americans do? Oh, we clear our throats, we stick our chests out, we get all high-minded, and we say, oh, the Middle East peace conflict, that will be soon, within the next month. How in the world do I know? In 1986, then President Ronald Reagan diagnosed with cancer. Thank God, mild, treatable form of cancer. But Gallup couldn't help themselves. They went out that night. As you may or may not be aware, today President Ronald Reagan was diagnosed with cancer. How serious do you think the cancer is? What am I, an amateur oncologist? But again, they asked, we answered. And thank God, since we are usually trying to project our greatest hope, what we hope the result will be when we lack an opinion. Most people said they did not think it was serious, and thank God it was not. But I can't possibly have an opinion about that. I'm not an oncologist. I'm not a Middle East peace conflict expert. I'm not even, but there, I don't even think they can know. And that's really important, because think about that. What it ends up doing is when someone sees a poll result or hears a poll result, and we are all guilty of this, mea culpa, if it confirms our own opinion and underlying belief, we repeat it as if it's a scientific, verifiable fact. And don't worry about the fact that it came from a media source that we stopped reading or consulting long ago. So if you stopped listening to what the New York Times had to say about you 2 decades ago, why in the world would you repeat their polling data? And the answer is because it proves I'm right. It tells me that other people say I'm right. Well, who cares what other people say? And who cares if 54% versus 58% versus 10% think that that's correct? Most of them are guessing anyway. The third thing I want to say about polling, how to get a good poll and how to read them and be a better consumer about polls, is about the science. If you're just going to look at, if we're just going to look at some of these media polls and not read the fine print, you might as well just go ask people on the street what they think. You might as well go out to my car, look at my dog, ask her 1 bark means yes, 2 barks mean no. And then, of course, if she gives you 3 barks, it's probably, I don't know, which is what lots of people say in polls. But if you're a pollster, you don't know how to take I don't know for an answer. If the election for president were being held today and the candidates were Al Gore and George W. Bush, for whom would you vote? If you say, well, I don't know. Well, which way do you lean? I really wasn't leaning. God, didn't we just do that? Didn't we just have an election? You want people to think 3 years in advance of something and have this committed opinion. I don't know is a very important result. I don't know is a tremendous insight, because when you cross-reference that with the different demographic and attitudinal groups, you find that people who say I don't know may otherwise be interested in knowing, or may be movable, educable. This is important insight. But if you say, well, which way do you lean? I have to know now. You never know. So if you look at the science, there are polls that are taken of 605 adults. Adults? On political issues, on public policy issues, when we know only 51% of us bothered to vote last year. Adults does not even screen for U.S. citizenship, let alone voter registration, let alone likelihood to vote. And do you know the worst way to find out if you're a likely voter? Is to ask you the question, are you likely to vote? Vote? Oh yeah, I'm getting there at 6 a.m. Sorry, man, the polls open at 7. I'm going to get in front. Vote, I'll be there. I vote every election, every single time. I do sit-ups every morning. I eat all my green vegetables. I never cheat on my wife or my taxes. Vote, vote, vote. Well, someone didn't vote. An awful lots of millions of people didn't vote. About 100 million of them last time. But everybody was going to vote. You got to make people feel comfortable to admit to you that they may not vote. You have to say, or are you undecided? Have you not decided for whom or whether to vote yet? Then you can ask them. Some people in your area have said they may not vote this time because they're just not much interested in the issues of the candidates, or they never seem to find the time because they're busy with work and family. Code word, you've never voted, you're not voting this time, past is prologue. What you've done in the past is the best way to predict what you're going to do in the future. But filter them out. Otherwise, you get this mishmash of people who don't vote, who aren't committed ideologues, responding in polls that then make our office holders say, I can't introduce that piece of legislation, look at the polls. I can't do that, I must stop from doing this. And poll results help us to most definitely confuse causation with coincidence. People will look at a poll result and they will say, 65% of the country say this, so it must be because of that. So I show you a conclusion, and then we have as many different opinions about why that result is as we are people in this room. That's dangerous too. Oh, George W. Bush's approval ratings are up. And then someone will say, yeah, it's because Tom Daschle was really mean last night on the O'Reilly factor. Love Bill O'Reilly, love going on his show, but not everybody's watching it. What do you mean it's because and by the way, not everybody knows who Tom Daschle is. That's not why. Or someone else will say, it's because of the Gary Condit thing, this helps Bush. Or someone else will say, it's because Bush looked great in that red tie yesterday. And they take themselves seriously. And then some people will say it's because of the people are getting their tax refunds. The answer is you don't know unless you ask people. Why did you just say that? Why specifically do you approve or disapprove of the job President Bush is doing? Otherwise, we're just guessing. And that allows journalists to look at a poll result and write an entire story according to their own underlying predilections. And fourthly, about polls. Place polls in their context. Polls are inherently limited. I would imagine for most pollsters, if we can really predict the future, they would start giving out the Powerball numbers to people who want them. I can tell you who's going to win the World Series this year, so you can go buy your tickets now. Go root for your team now. Polls are least useful, but most depended upon today for their predictive value. Polls are not a crystal ball. I'll give you a fine example that happened several years ago. If on a Friday, if you were my political candidate, and on a Friday before Election Day, we come out of the field and you are losing in the poll by 4 points, and I say, look, in the ballot, the head-to-head, you're losing by 4 points. And on Election Day, you lose by 4 points. I am not some wizard of accuracy. As Henri Matisse said, exactitude is not truth. And I would say truth is not exactitude for many people. If I say that to you, and you in fact lose by 4 points, I'm supposed to be happy that my candidate lost? That I'm some guru who got it right? Well, the candidate lost. That means I failed as a strategist if my seat is in fact around the strategy table. I failed as a strategist to tell you what else in the data would have helped you move those numbers. I would much prefer the candidate win by 2 points on Election Day and have some joker in the media say, oh, you were off by 6 points. Yeah, because people don't change their mind over the weekend. And of the 21% who were still undecided as of Friday who ended up voting, I was supposed to know exactly what they were going to do, even though they did not. Polls show the richness of data beyond those silly horse race numbers. The horse race numbers are silly. They're important, and unfortunately human nature is that people want everybody to like them, but political human nature is that you insist everyone love you. So the candidates and their consultants are often most focused and singularly focused on those ballot tests, which are most apt to change over time. What the voters think about the best way to reform education, or their position on abortion, or their position on the Second Amendment, that's not apt to change between now and Election Day. But whom they may support, that may change as things start to flesh out. And we find now more than ever, more and more late in the game deciders, more and more people making their decisions later on. What I don't see in the polls. New York Times ran a poll, as they do every month. In June, it made the front page story above the fold. Go back and look at it. June. Well, you wouldn't have to go back and look at it, because unless you were living in a cave, you heard it a gazillion times, because then it was repeated. And it was George W. Bush's approval ratings plummeted. Plummeted. And then they told you why it was. And they came up with all their reasons, which had nothing to do with the underlying poll. If you go back and read that story, the reasons were all conjecture built around his, quote, plummeting approval ratings, which according to the same New York Times CBS poll had gone from 53% to 48%. Plummeting approval ratings. 5 points, ladies and gentlemen. The margin of error of the poll was 4 points. Plummeting. But if you go on the website and you look at the New York Times poll, you find out all the things that were publicly reported but not publicly reported in the above-the-fold front page story. New York Times asked a great question. Every pollster asks the question. Slightly different phraseology, but it comes to the same result. New York Times asked it this way. What is the most important issue for government to address this year? It's a fine question because it's open-ended. You are welcome to say anything you want. Something big like missile defense system, something small like I'm mad about the local water tax. But you're welcome to say it. Well, the top 12 responses in some order that were reported on the New York Times website, that we the people, in the same poll that showed the plummeting approval ratings, education, Social Security, Medicare, energy, environment, healthcare, crime was up there. Missile defense was on there. Welfare reform had 2%. Guess we want more of it, fine. Guess what was conspicuous by their absence? Here's what I don't see in the polls. Nobody said abortion. Nobody said, quote, gun control. And among those who said abortion, when you cross-reference it, there's still 2-to-1 pro-life. That's on the New York Times' own website. But go back to the story. Part of the explanation as to why the president's approval ratings were plummeting is that he's a tool of the Christian right wing, is that he's too close to the NRA, is that he's too pro-life, and people don't like the Mexico City policy. Again, give us Americans a map and tell us to point where Mexico City is, before you start concluding that we don't like the Mexico City policy, therefore that's why his approval ratings are plummeting, even though in the same poll of the same sample, everybody forgot to say abortion was the most important problem for government to address. Conspicuous by their absence. What I don't see in the polls, I don't see that. Sure, 75% of Americans support this thing called campaign finance reform, apart from how few of us know exactly what that means and what that would entail. How about in the next question when it says, which of the following is most important for you and your family? And it says, reform the campaign finance laws, protecting Social Security and Medicare, reducing taxes for working families, protecting the environment, improving public education. Does anyone here still think campaign finance reform gets 75%? It's like an asterisk. It's nowhere, because there you've been forced to prioritize. Do read the fine print, but often, not just the fine print, but the non-print. You know, look at a poll result and say, first of all, just as if this were coming from someone, if this were advice from someone, do I trust that person? Do I trust this source for everything else? What is this source's agenda? Why, when I go on TV, does it have to say, Republican pollster, we're showing your warts on TV? You're a partisan. You're darn right I am, number one, because Thomas Jefferson said opinion is power, and I'm proud of that. But I am a Republican. I am a conservative. My polls are not. If my polls are, I'm going to get kicked out of business. That's what the free market does. But what is the incentive of the media to get their polls right? What has happened to CBS New York Times since their last poll they took in the presidential election in 1996 said Clinton 57, Dole 38? Every, quote, partisan pollster I know, except one, had either wagered bets or had publicly stated or had said in, speaking to other pollsters, every single one knew it was going to be darn near impossible for Clinton to crack 50%. Bill Clinton knew that. That's why he ran for himself and nobody else. Why he didn't stand on the stage and say, elect me and elect Senator Carl Levin again when he was in Michigan days before the election, because he knew he can't change. It's easier just to protect my job. And all of us partisan pollsters knew that, of course, Bob Dole was going to crack 40%. But New York Times, CBS poll, last one before the election, 57 Clinton, 38 Dole. If you're a Dole or a Clinton voter, what is your incentive to go out and vote that day? I've already told you you're wasting your time. Neither one of them can use your help. Think about that, though. That is very, very dangerous because it has a correspondingly depressing effect on a turnout. I will conclude by telling you, oh yes, this is what I want to tell you. Two very heartening things I see in the polls for conservatives. Number one, you still, in the ideological self-description, find that more people, including women, including lower income households, including union households, including people who said in the first question social issues are more important than economic issues, you find more people by convincing margins, way outside the margin of error margins, calling themselves conservative and liberal. 2-to-1, easily. The self-identified liberal label has not cracked 20% in ages. In ages. Go ask any Democratic pollster. In ages. That's why none of them run as that. That's why Mark Warner is Farmer Mark. You didn't know that, but he's Farmer Mark. He's Populist Mark. You show me anything in his campaign literature that says he's liberal. And he is. I can show you anything in his record and his statements that says he is. You show me anywhere. He actually calls himself a conservative. I was in a Richmond hotel room and I saw his ads and he was calling himself a conservative. That is very important because if people already identify themselves with a conservative philosophy, then those are steps in the right direction. And the second and final thing I wanted to point out to conservatives is, I don't know if it's in our best interest to mimic what most politicians and most people in the major media do by talking about, quote, issues. Issues. I certainly don't think it's important to talk about image, which they all seem to do. Charisma, who cares? Issues. I think it's important to talk about themes, bigger picture. Morton Blackwell taught me that a long time ago, that people in the conservative movement respond to big ideas, defeating the Soviet Union, reforming the tax code. Those are big ideas that have consistency. So these themes allow us to place our issues beneath the themes. And some of the themes we see emerging in the data, affordability. But if you talk affordability as a theme, then you do have people responding to that who do believe that tax cuts should go farther and faster, who do believe that health care is unaffordable, but prescription drugs should not necessarily be an entitlement under Medicare, who do believe that housing affordability is unattainable right now, but certainly don't believe that there should be housing subsidies for certain people. What they believe is that there should be property tax reduction. But there's a theme of affordability, another theme, quality of life, another theme, fairness. I have to tell you as conservatives, fairness has replaced equality completely as a core governing value. Years ago it was got to be equal, got to take your money and give it to me, got to take your job and give it to me, then we all have the same, we walk alike, we talk alike, we're all Stepford Americans, yip-de-doo. Equality no longer really exists as a core governing value so much as fairness. And fairness gives the impulse towards school choice. Fairness gives the impulse towards proper immigration reform. Fairness gives the impulse towards a flat tax or some type of across-the-board tax reduction. Fairness, that we all start out with the same opportunities. Where we go from there is up to our own efforts and goodwill. And then a final theme, security. This is very big for the conservative movement. We are finding security emerging as a theme. I think that's fabulous news because security, if you are concerned about security, if you as a conservative are talking to America about security, someone may be thinking missile defense, someone else may be thinking freedom from physical harm, from crime, lack of recidivism and abolition of parole and measures like that. Someone else may be thinking about long-term retirement security. Someone else may be considering that partial personal investment for Social Security is a good idea. Someone else may be thinking of family security and what that means to them personally. And as they go through the kitchen table economic considerations. security, affordability, quality of life, fairness, all resonant themes that we see coming through the data. You're not going to hear that, though, if the media continue to be obsessed with things like, quote, abortion and gun control, even though their own data show that those are conspicuous by their absence. Thank you, and I did want to say a very special thank you to Amelia and Ruth Blessing for that warm introduction, and to one of my heroes and heroines, Morton and Helen Blackwell. I can't tell you, well, you know, but what a difference these two individuals have made, not just in this building, in this area, in the movement, across this country now. Hundreds of campuses. We have people trained in the media who got their training here. We have people who know how to raise money and organize volunteers and run for office because they learned those tools here, because Morton got on some prop plane and flew to some unknown territory and gave them the tools. We must continue that, because I stood before you after Election Day 1998, and you said, what happened? And I said, if you remember nothing else, remember that 28% of self-identified conservatives yesterday on Election Day voted for the Democratic candidate. 28% of self-identified conservatives. That was a disheartening, disturbing trend that we saw again in the year 2000 at the congressional level. But now we are facing the prospect of not just self-identified conservatives voting the wrong way, but we're losing our vocal and visible conservatives in places like the United States Senate. That makes the Leadership Institute and the campus programs that much more important. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Kellyanne. It's always fascinating to hear you and to learn from you. What an articulate, magnificent speaker and thinker she is. Kellyanne, when Helen and I go to our favorite restaurant, we are at Country Cooking Restaurant in Culpeper, Virginia. And when the waitress comes up to us, she offers us a menu, and we say, we don't need a menu. We're taking the salad bar. Now, I say that just so that you'll get this straight the next time you give the talk, but the truth of the matter is the principle is correct, because we go to their salad bar because their salad bar is probably the best salad bar anywhere. And there's this incredible spread of stuff you can get at the salad bar, and all you can eat, the mashed potatoes and gravy, the stewed tomatoes, the boiled cabbage, the green beans with hunks of ham fat in them, the cornbread muffins that we just love, and there's this enormous variety. So the principle is correct, but I just wanted you to know that our favorite restaurant is the Country Cooking. And last Saturday noon, Helen and I took 9 of the Leadership Institute interns to have lunch at the Country Cooking in Culpeper, Virginia. We have a little gift for you in appreciation of your being with us here this morning, and I know that you have received an Adam Smith scarf, but here I want to give you a set of Leadership Institute mugs.
Thank you.
With my
Thank you very much.
45 laws of the public policy process. Okay, I'd like to invite you all to join us on Thursday, October 3rd. Why is it on a Thursday? Is this right?
Wednesday, October 3rd.
It's Wednesday. Okay. There's just a typo on my notes. Wednesday, October 3rd. The only time that we didn't have the Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast on a Wednesday is when the Wednesday was the 4th of July, and we thought that was inappropriate. Wednesday, October 3rd. Our special guest will be Congressman Ed Royce of California. He is a very fine person, and I'm sure that you will enjoy what Congressman Royce. He's very smart, solid conservative. Those of you who would like a tour of the Leadership Institute, Heidi Bridges will meet you here at the podium. Heidi, are you here? Where are you? Oops, is she not here? What? Well, anyhow, there will be a very nice young lady, Heidi Bridges, who will come right here in front of the lectern and will lead you off on a tour of the Institute if you would like to go through it for the first time or review what is happening. There's always developments around, and we're always pleased to show off the facilities. And I want to conclude by saying one thing. The truth of the matter is that it is not the dedication, brilliance, and hard work of Helen and me that counts to make this Leadership Institute what it is today. The truth of the matter is there's one reason why we can do what my staff and I, and with Helen's help, is working to build a new generation of conservative leaders, and that is because there are wonderful donors out there who see the potential for what we set out to do and who generously support us. And without that, Helen and I would be limited to small little groups that could meet in our living room and students who could stay in our guest bedroom. As it is, we are going, I believe, to this month train our 30,000th student at the Leadership Institute. Thank you all very much.